Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's August 28, 2017, and this is episode 587. As creative artists and sometimes small business owners, it's vitally important to continue to learn and grow on many levels. But I urge you to not get so caught up in the technical details that you become paralyzed in the field through overthinking every decision. I love learning new skills and continuing to hone my craft. You might have noticed that I've got a relatively good understanding of photography. My friend David Duchemin often drops me a line when he has something technical that he'd like describing, because he knows this is one of my stronger areas. My Craft and Vision ebooks were born of a need to fill a specific technical hole in their lineup, and my Making the Print book was a direct request from David. It helps that I have a strong technical background. I was the worst student when I was a kid back in England, but I learned the value of studying after moving to Japan in the early 90s, and I went to college here in Japan from 1995 to learn various computer skills. After getting good grades and passing a few exams, I finally realized that I'm not totally stupid, and I went on to study for a number of exams that took me into some great jobs in IT, and continued to build a foundation of both business and technical skills that would help me to wear the many hats that are required to run my company. I'd love to hire a few more people to help me cover some of the business processes that I have to cover. But to be totally honest, as a 1.5 person company, just me and my wife who helps out part-time, we still aren't really in a position to expand just yet. Because of this, I change hats literally by the minute sometimes as I market tours, deal with customer questions, print and post out my fine art prints, manage our accounts and maintain our servers and website, etc., just to name a few of the things that I get up to on a daily basis. There are areas when it would make so much more sense to just hire someone, but realistically, it just isn't possible. So I find myself continually being presented opportunities to learn new skills. For example, for the last week, I've spent almost every waking hour working through an intensive online course learning how to develop apps for iOS. I have an app that someone kindly created for me many years ago, but it's now shamefully outdated, and if I don't update it soon, it will not run on iOS 11 that isn't far away now. I asked around for a few quotes to get the app updated by a third party, but none of them were realistic from a financial perspective, so I decided to block out some time and learn how to do this myself. At this point, although it's going to be hard, I already have a good idea how I'm going to tackle not so much updating my current app, but rebuilding it from scratch so that I can not only keep it in the App Store, but also add native support for running on the iPad as well as the iPhone. I'm getting sidetracked a little here, but I'm telling you this to illustrate a point, which is that the first rule of learning something new should be to pick your battles and invest time in learning what you love to do, which in most cases, with our relationship in mind, is going to be photography related. I love making things, which is one of the reasons I fell in love with photography during my teens, and why it has remained a passion for more than 30 years. Especially as photography has evolved over the last 20 years, with the advent of digital, I found it fascinating to be able to merge my love for computers with my love for photography. I can say in all honesty that if we had continued with film, I would probably not be talking with you today, and I definitely wouldn't have built a photography-related business. It's not that I don't like film, I just found the connection between photography and the computer so natural and enjoyable. It was this connection that made photography so much more fun that I was able to give it my absolute all. How cool is it that we can now trip the shutter and see the image a moment later if we want to look? Being able to change the ISO between every image is another thing that I found totally awesome. Some will argue that we can benefit from the restrictions that film brings us, and I agree, as a learning process. But we can learn in similar ways by setting ourselves assignments, like going out with just one old memory card that only fits 36 images on, or taping a zoom lens to a set focal length to learn about framing. Personally, though, I don't do this kind of exercise. You might recall my episode on the mental checklist, which you can see at mbp.ac/498. In that episode, I described how I learned so much about photography simply by being deliberate in my processes and questioning every step of my shooting workflow until it became a mental checklist that I worked through as I shot a scene or subject. After working in this deliberate fashion for many years, a lot of the things that I used to have to mentally remind myself to do became second nature, but the questioning process remains. I tend to question all of my decisions just to keep myself in check. And although I know that I'm not getting every single opportunity available to me, I am making work that I'm mostly happy with and feel that I come away from most situations relatively happy that I've capitalized on my opportunities. The point here is more about being deliberate. If taping a lens at 50 millimeters will help to force yourself to think about composition, get to it. If simply asking yourself if the current perspective, which comes from your focal length and distance to the subject, is the optimal perspective for what you're trying to say in your photograph, that may well be enough. I feel that staying conscious of this kind of decision is more important than forcing oneself with physical restrictions. But we're all different and need to find our own best way to evolve and grow. One of the things that I'm very conscious of when deciding how to grow, though, as I mentioned earlier, is that I always create goals that lead towards results that I will enjoy. To be honest, the last week has been hard, and I probably have another week of going through my courses before I will be able to really start work on my app. But I have always enjoyed creating things, be it physical objects like a fine art print or a canvas gallery wrap, or redesigning my website. I find great satisfaction in sitting back and looking through my final selection of images from a trip or an updated photography portfolio. I know that I'm going to be over the moon when I'm able to update my own iOS app, and it never hurts to have an extra skill, even if I'm able to grow my company to the point where I hire a dedicated app developer. Having the knowledge and ability to talk to them on a deep level makes working with people so much easier. It has to feel right, though, for me to take a plunge like this and dedicate such a large chunk of time to learning something as complicated as a new computer programming language. I trust my instincts a lot when making these decisions. I have to be excited about the prospect of adding this new skill. In my photography, this is similar to how I decide the sort of photography that I will invest my time in. Living in Tokyo, a city of 13 million, I have endless opportunities around me to do street photography, but it doesn't excite me. I love looking at street photography, but I don't enjoy doing it enough to prioritize my own time to go out and shoot street. I get infinitely more pleasure out of photographing nature and landscapes, and my travel photography is also very special to me. I think it's partly because it's so removed from my everyday environment. But when I look at work in the genres that I have chosen, it feels more natural and more me. This is probably a strong indication that I've found the genres in which I excel, and in turn, I prioritize my time to concentrate more on these genres that I want to continue to grow in. When I first started to learn photography before we had access to the internet as we do now, I read books on the basics. I learned about apertures, shutter speeds, and the exposure triangle, etc. I learned compositional theory and everything I needed to know to get out with the camera and start to experiment. Most of the studying I did was great to help me build a strong foundation, but the main reason that I would study back then was to keep myself engaged in a hobby that I had become so passionate about that I wanted to be doing something photography related for as much time as possible. I'm recalling when I first got to Japan now, back in 1991, when I would get home from work and study Japanese for a few hours, but then with some free time to kill, I'd pick up a book on photography. I'm sure you've felt the same. You become so fixated on something that you love that you start to look up as much information on that subject as possible, just to quench your thirst for whatever it is that you've fallen in love with. This is a wonderful driving force that we can use to absorb lots of information that really helps to drive us forwards. Herein, though, lies one possible problem that I'd like to talk about a little more. As I come into contact with photographers in the field and in teaching environments, I'm running into more and more people that are obviously totally overwhelmed with information and the desire to consume every bit of photography knowledge available to them. This drive and momentum can be a huge enabler when it comes to learning more about our craft, but it's leading to two very serious problems, which are the main reasons I decided to share my thoughts on this with you today. Firstly, I'm seeing people that are spending so much time online studying every aspect of photography that they are cutting down on the time that they could actually be out with the camera. The act of studying photography for some becomes the goal. If you find yourself more excited by the act of studying photography than actually doing it, you might want to consider your motivations. I know that I'm seen as a bit of an authority thanks to the detail that I put into my posts and podcasts, which is also helped by my engineering and technical background. But you might be surprised to hear that I've not studied much of what I talk about in order to learn what I know about photography. I've learned pretty much everything I know through getting out and doing it, then most of the time guessing what I need to do to overcome issues. For very complicated topics, I will research specific areas online, but generally I do just enough to set myself back on the right track and figure the rest out for myself. I think perhaps one of the problems might be that we are surrounded by information, and with the internet, we have access to people that know their stuff. Maybe for someone that feels there is still a long way to go on their learning path, there is a certain amount of pressure to try to suck up as much of this information as possible. I guess what I'm saying is that it comes down to confidence. It's natural to study harder if you don't feel confident in your ability to go out and make beautiful images. But that assumes that the problem is a lack of knowledge of photography. But I'd propose that this can also come simply from not providing yourself with enough opportunities to go out and make beautiful photographs. Maybe it's because you aren't visiting locations that really strike a chord with your own creative desires, or possibly you are not able to translate what you know you want to create in your mind's eye to your actions as you photograph your chosen subject. And that leaves you feeling inadequate, and that drives you to study and study. Only by actually creating work that at least gets close to what we'd like to create gives us a feeling that we have achieved a certain amount of mastery. We don't feel as though we've mastered something simply by reading a book or doing an online course. We only feel that confidence after putting what we learned into practice and have images that we feel happy with, or at least start to edge closer to that state. Of course, even once you feel that you have a good technical grasp of photography and you're happy with your composition and creative decisions, there is always room for improvement. Even people that have mastered every aspect they require to do their work continue to learn. I propose that this learning is not about the effects of aperture and focus distance on depth of field, or trying to wrap their head around the circle of confusion, but more about the struggle with how they can continue to create even more beautiful photographs. One thing that I want to make totally clear is that I'm not saying that there is no need to study photography. It's absolutely necessary to build a solid foundation and then continue to bolster your knowledge with continuous top ups. What I am saying is that we have to achieve a balance between the time we spend learning about photography and the time we spend doing photography and putting what we learned into practice, building success experiences, or identifying the areas that we need to spend more time thinking about. In addition to the first problem of studying becoming the goal rather than getting out with the camera, the other problem that I'm seeing as more and more information becomes available to us is that some people develop a serious case of analysis paralysis. People sometimes get so wrapped up in thinking through the formulas and trying to implement techniques that they've learned that they stop asking themselves the important questions that would otherwise lead them to figure out the problems for themselves. What's often worse is that they are no longer able to simply enjoy the moment and what I consider to be a meditative experience when making photographs. On my workshops, I've been called over for advice and before long find myself having to just ask the participant to stop thinking about all of the stuff that they've learned and take a step back and just think about the problem at hand. The knowledge that you've learned academically only starts to become your own when you apply it to achieve a specific goal or overcome a specific problem that you personally are encountering. This academic knowledge is useful and necessary, but people get so wrapped up in other people's reasons for applying it that it stifles them, effectively causing a type of analysis paralysis in the field. This stops you from being open to the scene and removes you from the moment, which is a shame because we can only capture what we fully appreciate. We need to be there to have any kind of chance of really capturing the essence of the moment in our photographs. Let's consider a few other points that will hopefully help to maximize our opportunities in the field. One thing that will remove you from the moment is fumbling with your gear. Learn your gear and buy into a camera system that doesn't fight you. I've seen people on my tours that spend time trying to figure out how to do some very basic things like turn on auto ISO or enable continuous focusing. Of course, I help with this when I'm there, but you aren't always going to be on a workshop with someone that can help. You need to know how to change at least the commonly used settings, and quite often this requires you to just set time aside and sit down and read the manual. As well as I know my Canon cameras, whenever I buy a new camera, I sit down for an evening with the manual and make sure I understand all of the new features and what's changed over the previous generation of that camera. And at the very least, make sure that you put the PDF of your camera's manual onto your phone or iPad, or even drop the paper manual into your camera bag before going on a trip, so that you can figure out how to do something while you're out and about. Ideally, you don't want to be looking stuff up in the heat of the moment, but having your manual with you can prevent some very vexing situations, especially on multi-day trips. Ultimately, as we've already discussed, the only way to really understand your camera is to use it a lot. If you only shoot for 2 weeks a year when you travel, you'll lose all of the muscle memory and it feels very rusty. We have to keep the gears oiled by shooting regularly, even if it's just by slinging your camera over your shoulder when you go out for a walk. It's not always about creating killer shots. For me, just the act of raising the camera to my eye, composing the photo, and releasing the shutter is a relaxing, therapeutic action. And this helps us to keep our shooting muscle memory in shape. As we gain a grasp of the basics, it's vitally important to get out in the field and start to find real problems that need solving. We only really understand how to apply what we've learned by overcoming problems that we face in real life. You might, for example, photograph a mountain stream or a waterfall and find that you don't feel the results are as aesthetically pleasing as you'd hoped, and you need to identify what it is that you want to change and what you have to do to make the change. Identifying and then solving problems again and again is what makes us better photographers. The more problems we solve, the better we get at solving problems. One way to bring your waterfall shot closer to what you are hoping to create might be to use a neutral density filter to allow the water to move during your exposure, creating that beautiful silky effect that I'm sure you're familiar with. The next question is going to be which ND filter to use to get the results you want. Quite often, between a half a second and 1 second is a great shutter speed for shooting waterfalls, and depending on the amount of ambient light, might require a 3-stop or an ND8 filter. You might also learn through experience that photographing waterfalls in direct sunlight doesn't really work. It's best to shoot them on heavily overcast days or when the sun isn't shining directly on them. Of course, if you don't even own any neutral density filters, this would be your prompt to buy some. Personally, I don't like or use gradual neutral density filters, and the large square filter systems are too bulky, difficult to use in inclement weather, and I just feel that they're unnecessary. I'm now buying circular solid neutral density filters from Breakthrough Photography. Their X4 ND filter series is amazing. By the way, when I mention some of these things, I'm making the text on the blog a link so that you can click through to take a look at this stuff. And there are a few images embedded in today's post as well. So if you aren't using a device that allows you to see the images as I talk or follow along with the text, do go over to the website at mbp.ac/587 to follow along. One of the best ways to understand that we can do better is to look at the work of others. Buy books of photographs from masters in your chosen genres. There are way too many to name them all, but I have books from people such as, obviously, Ansel Adams, Michael Kenner, Nick Brandt, Michael Freeman, Paul Nicklin, Tony Sweet, and the amazing Sebastião Salgado. We don't have to mimic these photographers or compare ourselves to them, but I think building a mental database of visual possibilities is vital to help us question our own work and see where we might be able to do better. The more visual possibilities you memorize, the more likely you are to identify and hopefully avoid a potential problem with an image as we create it. Even after we get home and start to go through our images, though, it's really important to ask why some images didn't work out as well as we'd hoped, and commit the answers to these questions to memory to avoid making the same mistakes in the future. We all have to go through this, and the cool thing is that it never really stops. It doesn't matter how accomplished we become, there is always room for improvement. Although I am often happy with some of the photographs I come home with, I go through very natural phases when I think my work sucks. Thankfully, once my emotional roller coaster ride is over, I'm generally happy with my final selection, although I always know that as I grow, I will be able to do better. I think this is important to drive us forwards. We have to continue to look for areas in which we can improve. And if my process of questioning myself in the field doesn't help me to improve as I shoot, I store the insights that I gain from my image editing process in my mental database and try to implement these ideas as I continue to shoot. It would be great to be able to simply think through the next 20 years and just be amazing right now. But I believe that this has to be an iterative process. We have to grow in stages to ensure that we have a firm foundation on which to grow. To wrap this up, I'd just like to ensure that you understand a few of the points I'm trying to make here. The most important thing is that I'm not saying that we shouldn't study. If you are using your spare time to suck up information and simply find that enjoyable, that's great. Indeed, if you have a strong desire to do an online course to learn something new, and the weekend is the only time that you have, by all means do it, even if it means skipping your weekend shoot. It will hopefully help you to overcome problems that you are facing. What I strongly urge you to do, though, is consider your motives. If you are trying to build your confidence as a photographer, please don't give studying the theory preference over getting out with your camera and making photographs. Ultimately, that is the only way you'll get better at making photographs and solidifying the theory that you've learned. I really urge you to almost just check that the act of studying itself has not become the goal. There is no point in studying every aspect of photography if you prioritize this so high that you never pick up the camera and go outside to use it, or if it stifles you in the field. We can become infinitely better photographers by being deliberate in our actions and decisions as we make our photographs. I'd even propose that we can be so much more by poring over books of photographs from artists that we respect and nurture our visual database of possibilities while honing our problem-solving skills to overcome issues that prevent us from creating the sort of work that we long to create. One last thought is that if you have any specific areas of photography that you simply cannot grasp or would just like to know more about, feel free to mention this in the comments on the blog post at mbp.ac/587 or use our contact form that's linked from the top of each page on the website. Of course, I don't know everything, but I have a good handle on lots of stuff, and I can always queue up a topic to talk about as time allows, so don't be shy. Also, just take a moment to hit the search button at the top of the screen and see if I haven't already covered what you're interested in. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Google+, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, etc. and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye-bye.